All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're exploring something kind of counterintuitive, the power of being a generalist.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? We live in a world obsessed with specialization, niches.
Exactly. But today's deep dive is going to challenge that assumption. We're looking at David Epstein's range, how generalists triumph.
Range is such a thought-provoking book, really makes you question a lot of what we assume about success.
Absolutely. So Epstein starts off with this captivating story. A kid couldn't sit still, always trying new sports, squash, skiing, swimming.
Sounds a little like, well, a lot of kids, right?
Totally. But this kid grew up to be Roger Federer.
Aha, no way.
Yeah. And the point isn't that, trying a bunch of sports makes you a tennis pro. It's about developing a diverse skill set early on. Like Federer wasn't focused on winning. He was just exploring, building athleticism and coordination.
That kind of foundation is invaluable no matter what field you end up in. And you know what? This actually ties into something Epstein talks about later in the book about late specializers.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
He gave a talk to military veterans transitioning to new careers. Many felt behind, like they had messed up by not specializing earlier.
That's a shame. They shouldn't feel that way.
Exactly. Epstein argues that specializing later can be a huge advantage. Those veterans, they've got adaptability, problem-solving skills honed under pressure. Those are gold in any career.
Right. It's not when you specialize. It's what you bring to the table when you do.
hmm
I love how Epstein uses this analogy to describe over-specialization, parallel trenches. He actually quotes an internationally renowned scientist who uses this term.
Parallel trenches. That's intriguing. What's that all about?
Picture everyone digging deeper into their own trench, never looking up, right? Even though the solution to their problem might be right next door.
Ah, I get it. They get so focused on their narrow field, they miss the bigger picture, the connections.
Bingo, it stifles innovation, creativity in every field. Think about it. Business, science, the arts. People get stuck in their silos.
Okay, I'm seeing how this all ties together. So how does the story of the Polgar sisters fit into this?
The Polgar sisters, a classic example, right? Their father was determined to make them chess prodigies, intense training from a young age. And guess what? It worked.
Yeah, they became some of the best in the world, right? It's often used to argue for early specialization.
Exactly. But here's the twist. Even Laszlo Polgar, their dad, later admitted his approach wasn't the only factor. He said their natural talent and love for the game mattered hugely.
So was it the training or their innate ability? Nature versus nurture, that age-old debate. It makes you wonder.
Right, and it challenges this idea that there's one right way to achieve mastery. And speaking of mastery, we got to talk about Garry Kasparov, the chess grandmaster who lost to Deep Blue.
Oh yeah, the IBM supercomputer. That was a landmark event.
You'd think that loss would have made him anti-AI, but actually the opposite happened.
Really?
Kasparov saw it as a learning opportunity. He realized AI was amazing at tactics, quick move combinations, but humans excel at strategy, the big picture stuff.
Wow, that's insightful. And this applies to way more than just chess, doesn't it? It's about the future of work in general.
Exactly. As technology advances, we got to focus on what makes us human, what machines can't replicate, strategy, creativity, connecting the dots across fields.
It's like that old saying, work smarter, not harder. We need to leverage our unique strengths.
And it's not just speculation. Epstein found that Nobel laureates, top scientists, are way more likely to have artistic hobbies.
So their creative outlets are fueling their scientific breakthroughs, like those parallel trenches coming together.
Exactly. It's not about being good at one thing. It's about drawing from diverse experiences to solve problems creatively.
Having a well-rounded toolbox, ready to tackle any challenge that comes your way. I love that. It's like having all these different mental tools at your disposal, right? And speaking of tools, Epstein takes us on this journey back in time to 17th century Venice to these orphanages called the ospedali.
Wait, orphanages? What's the connection to, well, anything we've been talking about?
These ospedales were famous, like seriously renowned, for producing amazing musicians.
Orphanages known for their musical excellence. Okay, I'm intrigued. I got to know more. What made them so special?
They provided really rigorous musical training to the girls there, and many of them, like a lot of them, became proficient on multiple instruments.
Wow, imagine that learning environment, surrounded by talent, exposed to different styles, techniques.
Exactly. Think about the richness of that experience.
It's like a real-world example of what we were talking about before, interleaving mixed practice.
Oh, you're totally right. Instead of just one instrument, they were building a broader musical foundation, which, probably helped them excel even more when they did specialize later on.
Like cross-training, but for your brain.
I like that. And it challenges us to rethink those rigid categories we put ourselves in.
Yeah, totally. Like, I'm a guitarist. I'm a pianist. What if we just embraced being a musician, constantly exploring, expanding our horizons?
Now you're talking. And it goes way beyond music, too. Think about any field where people get stuck in their little specialties.
What if we encouraged more fluidity, more cross-pollination? That'd be amazing.
Right. And it makes me think of Epstein's comparison of, like, jazz and classical musicians.
Yeah. Totally different approaches, right?
Jazz, it's all about improvisation, learning by ear, experimentation. Classical is more about like technical proficiency, sticking to the written score.
Although even in classical music, you see more improvisation these days.
That's true. Things are changing. And, sometimes those less traditional paths lead to amazing results. Think about Django Reinhardt, the legendary jazz guitarist.
Oh, yeah. I love his music.
He couldn't even read music, learned everything by listening, imitating, feeling his way through.
Wow. That's incredible. So we've talked about music, chess, but what about something like math, often seen as like the domain of specialization?
Right. And Epstein actually has some pretty interesting, maybe even controversial things to say about math education.
Oh, what?
He describes this typical American math classroom, all about memorizing procedures, getting the right answer.
Instead of really understanding the concepts, the why behind it all.
Exactly. It's like teaching kids to be calculators instead of mathematicians.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative?
Well, this brings us to desirable difficulties in learning.
Desirable difficulties. That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right? But research suggests that making learning a bit harder actually leads to better retention and flexibility in the long run.
So instead of drilling facts and formulas, challenge students to think critically, grapple with the material.
Exactly. Things like spaced repetition, you revisit material at increasing intervals and interleaving, mixing up different subjects during study.
It's like building a stronger foundation for your knowledge instead of just piling things on top.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of making connections, this leads us to one of the most powerful tools we have, analogical thinking.
Analogies. I love a good analogy. Makes things so much clearer.
Right. They're like mental bridges, connecting the familiar to the unfamiliar, helping us grasp new concepts.
Epstein has some really cool examples, like scientists using analogies from biology to develop, neural networks in AI.
Yeah. Or researchers using movie analogies to predict box office revenue.
It's like saying your love of rom-coms can help you understand algorithms. Crazy, right?
But that ability to make connections across fields, that's a real cognitive superpower.
Totally agree. So we've been talking about the benefits of generalism, but what about grit?
Ah, yes, the buzzword of the decade.
Everyone says it's the key to success, but Epstein pushes back a little on that.
He makes the point that grit might not be as crucial for those still exploring, figuring things out.
Yeah, especially in a world that's constantly changing.
He uses the example of West Point cadets, drawn to rigid military paths.
Super gritty, but as they learned and grew, many realized they wanted more flexibility.
It wasn't lack of grit, it was recognizing their paths needed to evolve.
Makes sense. Reminds me of another experiment, the marshmallow test.
Oh, the classic. Kids, marshmallow, delayed gratification, right?
We assume those who resist are destined for success. But Epstein says it's not that simple.
It's context dependent and can actually be learned, not just some innate predictor of your future.
Another myth busted. And this ties into the work of Herminie Barra, who says we discover ourselves through action, not just thinking.
Love that. She actually advises first act, then think, when it comes to finding a fulfilling career.
Get out there, try things, see what clicks. Takes the pressure off having it all figured out from day one.
And that can be so freeing, especially for those feeling lost or stuck.
Totally. You can't think your way into a new career. You have to act your way into it.
Which reminds me of that concept, the deliberate amateur, coined by Sarah Lewis.
Deliberate amateur, what's that all about?
It's about pursuing things outside your specialization with real intention, passion, like Howard Finster.
Who's Howard Finster?
A minister who became a renowned artist in his late 50s, discovered this hidden talent, no formal training, but he embraced it fully.
Wow, that's inspiring. Never too late to explore and discover hidden talents.
Right. And those seemingly unrelated things can enrich our lives and work in amazing ways.
So even if you're on a certain path, make time for those side projects, those hobbies that spark your curiosity.
You never know where they might lead. And, this spirit of exploration is what drives Alf Bingham's company, Incentive.
Incentive, what do they do?
They crowdsource solutions to, really tough scientific and technical problems.
Interesting. And what's their secret sauce?
They often find the best solutions come from people outside the field.
Wait, what? People with no expertise solving these complex problems.
Yep. It's another case of breaking out of those parallel trenches leading to breakthroughs.
Sometimes a fresh perspective is all it takes, huh?
Exactly. And they've got the stats to prove it. Over a third of their challenges are solved by outsiders.
That's incredible. Makes you wonder what we're missing by sticking to those narrow lanes.
Right. This reminds me of Don Swanson, a real pioneer in information science.
I don't think I'm familiar with his work.
He foresaw this, increasing isolation of knowledge domains, and said we need tools to connect them.
Building bridges between those trenches.
Exactly. He created a system called Aerosmith, helped researchers find hidden connections between seemingly unrelated scientific articles.
Like a digital matchmaker for ideas.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
He was ahead of his time, recognizing that the best insights often lie at those intersections.
So it's not just about having specialists. We also need those who can see the bigger picture.
Totally agree. And this brings us to a really powerful story that illustrates this, the case of Jill Viles and her family.
What happened to them?
They were dealing with a rare genetic disorder, years searching for answers, doctors who were experts in their narrow fields but couldn't put the pieces together.
So the parallel trenches problem playing out in a real-life, heartbreaking situation.
Exactly. It highlights the need for what we might call lateral thinking integrators.
People who can bridge those gaps, connect the dots that others miss.
Think about someone like Nintendo's Gunpei Yokoi. Combine technology with intuitive design.
Or Charles Darwin, drawing on his vast network of correspondence for his theory of evolution.
So many great examples. It's not about choosing between specialists or generalists. It's about valuing both.
Like Freeman Dyson said, we need both frogs and birds in science.
The frogs diving deep, the birds soaring above, seeing the whole landscape.
Both essential for progress. And this brings us back to Arturo Quesadevall, the scientist with the parallel trenches analogy.
Right. He's not just complaining, he's advocating for broader education, emphasizing critical thinking, interdisciplinary approaches.
He's got a great quote. I love this one. He says, "The answer to Alzheimer's disease may come from a misfolding protein in a cucumber."
What a visual. But it underscores this point perfectly.
Solutions can come from the most unexpected places if we're willing to look beyond our own narrow expertise. That cucumber thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that the best solutions sometimes come from connecting the most unexpected ideas.
Totally. It's not even thinking outside the box. It's realizing there was never a box to begin with.
I like that. And this applies to, well, way more than just science, right? It's about how we approach our own goals, our careers.
Absolutely. Epstein talks about this, like the difference between kind and wicked learning environments.
Okay, kind versus wicked. Break that down for me.
Kind environments, the rules are clear, feedback is immediate. You see patterns like learning to code.
Or mastering a new language, training for a marathon, that sort of thing.
Right. Those are great. There's satisfaction in mastering those skills.
Totally. But then there's those bigger goals, the wicked ones.
Where the rules are changing constantly, feedback is delayed, maybe unclear, the patterns are harder to see.
Like starting a business, writing a book, navigating a career change, things like that.
Exactly. Those can feel way more daunting.
Yeah, because there's no clear path, no guarantees. It's easy to get discouraged.
And that's where the generalist mindset shines, It's not about having all the answers up front.
It's about being adaptable, resourceful, rolling with the punches.
Exactly. Embracing the unknown, experimenting, learning from mistakes as you go.
It's like the only constant is change.
Right.
And the world's changing faster than ever.
Adaptability is key in pretty much every field.
Speaking of change and adapting, I keep thinking about that Challenger disaster, that story Epstein tells.
Oh, yeah. The NASA managers.
Yeah.
Launching the shuttle despite those warnings from the engineers.
It's heartbreaking, You'd think with all their data expertise, they would see the risks.
But what's fascinating and tragic is that their past successes actually worked against them.
How so?
They were so used to relying on data, procedures, things going according to plan, they didn't fully account for the new information, the potential risks.
So their expertise became a blind spot.
In a way, yeah, they were so focused on what they knew, what had worked before, they missed the bigger picture, the emerging dangers.
It's a powerful reminder that even in fields that seem very kind, there will be those wicked moments.
When the rules change and we have to adapt, that's where the generalist's ability to think critically, question things, be open to new info becomes so crucial.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we cultivate that kind of flexible thinking?
Epstein talks about decoupling process accountability from outcome accountability.
Okay, gotta admit, that sounds a little jargony to me. What does that actually mean in practice?
It's about recognizing that sometimes the best decisions don't lead to the outcomes we want, and vice versa.
So don't just focus on results. Look at the process, the thinking behind it.
Right. Create a culture where people feel safe to speak up, challenge the status quo, offer alternatives, even if they're unconventional.
Don't punish people for making mistakes. Encourage them to learn from them, share their insights.
Exactly. Reward critical thinking, willingness to learn, even if the ideas don't always work out.
Celebrate failures as learning opportunities, not signs of incompetence.
It's about psychological safety, feeling empowered to take risks, experiment, knowing it's okay to try new things.
Because that's how real innovation happens.
Absolutely. Not through rigid procedures or blind faith in the past, but through questioning, exploring, adapting, embracing the unexpected.
That's the power of being a generalist right there.
It's recognizing that the world is complex. The most interesting solutions come from those who connect the dots, challenge assumptions, think beyond those parallel trenches.
And it's about remembering we all have something unique to offer, right? We don't all have to be Nobel Prize winners.
But we each have our own range, our own blend of experiences and knowledge that's valuable.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question. What skill or interest do you have that you could combine with your current expertise to create something new?
Don't underestimate the power of your own range. Explore those hidden passions, see what emerges.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Remember, it's never too late to embrace your inner generalist and discover the power of range.